The morning sun cast long shadows across the military compound as Commander Jake Morrison received the call that would change everything. His team of Navy SEALs had just returned from what was supposed to be a routine extraction mission in Eastern Europe. But nothing about the last 72 hours had been routine. "Sir, we have a problem," his communications officer reported, handing him a classified briefing. The document detailed their recent operation to rescue Dr. Elena Vasquez, a nuclear physicist who had been kidnapped by a notorious arms dealer known only as the Broker. The mission had started perfectly. Intelligence was solid, entry points were clear, and the team moved like clockwork through the compound. But everything went wrong in the final moments. As they reached Dr. Vasquez's location, they discovered she had already been moved. Worse, they had walked straight into a trap. The Broker's men had been waiting, turning what should have been a quick extraction into a running firefight through unfamiliar territory. Morrison's jaw tightened as he read the casualty report. 2 of his best men were in critical condition, and 3 others were nursing serious injuries. They had barely escaped with their lives, and Dr. Vasquez was still missing. The intelligence that led them to the compound had been deliberately leaked, making them pawns in a larger game they didn't understand. The debriefing room felt heavy with failure as Morrison faced his superior officers. General Richardson, a man who had seen countless operations succeed and fail, looked grim as he reviewed the mission report. "Commander, this isn't just about one failed rescue anymore. Our sources indicate the Broker is planning to auction Dr. Vasquez's knowledge to the highest bidder within 48 hours. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on him. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just any scientist. Her research into miniaturized nuclear devices could revolutionize warfare if it fell into the wrong hands. Every hour she remained captive brought the world closer to a catastrophic shift in global power. "What are our options, sir?" Morrison asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be what his team needed to hear. General Richardson exchanged glances with the intelligence officers present before responding. "The political situation has changed. The host country is refusing to allow any further military operations on their soil. They're concerned about diplomatic fallout if another American mission goes wrong in their territory." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Morrison's SEALs were some of the most elite warriors in the world, trained for impossible missions and equipped with cutting-edge technology. But politics and international relations had just clipped their wings at the worst possible moment. "There has to be something we can do," Morrison insisted. "We can't just abandon Dr. Vasquez and let her research fall into terrorist hands." The general's expression remained stone-faced. "I'm sorry, Commander. The decision comes from the highest levels. We're officially acknowledging that this mission is beyond our current capabilities. The SEALs are being pulled back." Morrison felt something break inside him. In his 15 years of service, he had never walked away from a mission incomplete. His team had built their reputation on succeeding where others failed, on finding solutions when conventional wisdom said there were none. The idea of defeat was foreign to everything they represented. As the meeting concluded and Morrison walked back to brief his team, he passed through the compound's international wing. Here, elite units from allied nations trained alongside American forces, sharing techniques and building bonds that transcended borders. It was in this section that Morrison first noticed him, a solitary figure in an unfamiliar uniform, moving with a precision that caught even a SEAL commander's attention. The man appeared to be in his 30s, with the lean build of someone accustomed to physical demands. His uniform bore no obvious national markings, but there was something about his bearing that suggested noble military tradition. He moved through combat drills with a fluidity that spoke of years of intensive training, each movement economical and purposeful. Morrison found himself pausing to watch as the stranger engaged multiple opponents in hand-to-hand combat training. Where others might use brute force or standard techniques, this man employed methods that seemed almost artistic in their execution. He disabled his opponents with minimal effort, always staying one step ahead of their attacks. "Impressive, isn't he?" came a voice from behind Morrison. He turned to see Colonel Sarah Chen, the compound's liaison for international forces. "That's Marcus Kensington, Royal Guard from the British Special Air Service. He's here on a cross-training exchange, but his background is quite unique." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "He comes from a long line of military service. His family has protected British royalty for generations. But Marcus chose a different path. He joined the SAS and became one of their most decorated operatives before being selected for the Royal Guard's most classified unit. They handle situations that officially never happen. As if sensing their conversation, Marcus concluded his training session and approached. Up close, Morrison could see the intelligence in the man's eyes, along with something else, a quiet confidence that reminded him of his own best operators. "Commander Morrison," Marcus said with a slight accent that spoke of elite education and military bearing. "I couldn't help but overhear some chatter about your recent difficulties. If I may be so bold, it sounds like you've encountered a situation that requires unconventional solutions." Morrison studied the Royal Guard operative carefully. There was something about Marcus that suggested he knew more about their failed mission than he should have. In the world of special operations, information traveled through unofficial channels, and Morrison suspected those channels had been quite active recently. "I appreciate the interest," Morrison replied cautiously, "but our situation is somewhat complicated by political constraints." Marcus smiled slightly, and Morrison caught a glimpse of something that made him reconsider everything about their conversation. "Commander, in my experience, political constraints often create opportunities for those willing to operate outside traditional frameworks. Sometimes the most direct path to success requires abandoning conventional approaches entirely." Morrison found himself intrigued, despite his better judgment. Military protocol dictated that he shouldn't discuss classified operations with foreign nationals, even allied ones. But something about Marcus Kensington suggested this conversation might lead somewhere important. "Walk with me," Marcus said, gesturing toward a quieter section of the compound. "I have some information that might interest you, and I suspect you have details that could prove valuable to both our interests." As they moved away from the main training areas, Morrison noticed how Marcus seemed to know exactly where the surveillance blind spots were located. It was the kind of knowledge that came from either extensive reconnaissance or insider information about the facility's security layout. "How much do you know about our situation?" Morrison asked directly. Marcus paused beside a maintenance building that provided excellent cover from both visual and electronic surveillance. "I know that Dr. Elena Vasquez was taken by Victor Kozlov, who operates under the alias The Broker. I know your extraction team walked into a prepared ambush, suggesting either compromised intelligence or a deliberate leak. And I know that political pressure has forced your government to officially abandon the rescue mission." Morrison felt his pulse quicken. This level of detail wasn't something that would be shared through normal diplomatic channels. "You seem remarkably well informed for someone who's supposed to be here on a training exchange." "Commander, the Royal Guard doesn't send operatives on routine training exchanges. My presence here is connected to a parallel investigation that's been ongoing for several months. Victor Kozlov has been selling advanced weapons technology to terrorist organizations, and some of that technology has been used against British interests." The pieces began falling into place in Morrison's mind. "You've been tracking the broker independently." "For 8 months," Marcus confirmed. "We've identified his network, mapped his operational patterns, and located 3 of his primary facilities. What we lacked was current intelligence on his most recent acquisition, Dr. Vasquez and her research." Morrison felt a spark of hope for the first time since the failed mission. "What exactly are you proposing?" Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed Morrison a detailed satellite image of a fortified compound nestled in a remote valley. "This is Kozlov's primary facility, located in neutral territory where neither American nor British forces are officially prohibited from operating. Our intelligence suggests this is where he's holding Dr. Vasquez while arranging the auction of her research." The compound looked formidable, multiple buildings surrounded by high walls, guard towers at strategic points, and clear fields of fire that would make any direct assault extremely costly. Morrison's professional eye immediately began identifying potential approach routes and defensive vulnerabilities. "What's your assessment of the facility's defenses?" Morrison asked. "Approximately 40 guards, rotating shifts, with electronic surveillance covering all obvious approach routes. Kozlov learned from your previous attempt. He's expecting another American assault team and has prepared accordingly. But he's not expecting a single operative using unconventional infiltration methods." Morrison looked up from the tablet. "Single operative? You're talking about going in alone? The Royal Guard has certain advantages that conventional military units don't possess. We're trained in methods that date back centuries, combined with modern technology and tactics. Sometimes the old ways prove most effective when contemporary approaches have failed. There was something in Marcus's tone that suggested confidence built on experience rather than bravado. Morrison had worked with enough elite operatives to recognize the difference between genuine capability and misplaced pride. Even if you could get inside, extraction would be nearly impossible. You'd be facing overwhelming odds with no backup and no official support. Marcus smiled slightly. Commander, the Royal Guard has been protecting valuable assets under impossible circumstances for over 400 years. We've developed certain techniques for succeeding when failure seems inevitable. Morrison found himself considering possibilities that should have been dismissed immediately. Everything about military protocol and common sense argued against what Marcus was suggesting. But the alternative was accepting defeat and allowing dangerous technology to fall into terrorist hands. What would you need from us? Morrison asked, surprising himself with the question. Information sharing primarily. Your intelligence gathering on Kozlov's operations, facility layouts, guard rotations, and communication patterns. In exchange, I provide you with real-time updates on the rescue mission and ensure Dr. Vasquez reaches safety. And if you're captured or killed? Then officially, a Royal Guard operative died during a training accident at an American facility. There would be no connection to any rescue mission, and no diplomatic complications for either of our governments. Morrison appreciated the practical thinking, but something else bothered him. Why would you risk this? Dr. Vasquez is an American citizen, and her research primarily affects American interests. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Morrison sensed there was more to the story than strategic considerations. My last mission involved tracking weapons that Kozlov had sold to a terrorist cell in London. They used those weapons to attack a civilian target. 43 people died, including a 7-year-old girl named Emma who was visiting the museum with her school class. The personal element explained the intensity Morrison had sensed from the beginning. Marcus wasn't just proposing a mission. He was seeking justice for victims who couldn't speak for themselves. The official channels have failed, Marcus continued. Political considerations and bureaucratic procedures have allowed Kozlov to continue operating, while innocent people pay the price. Sometimes justice requires individuals willing to act when institutions cannot. Morrison understood that feeling completely. His own frustration with the failed mission and subsequent political restrictions had been eating at him since the debriefing. The idea that they might have to abandon Dr. Vasquez felt like betraying everything the SEALs represented. I need to know more about your capabilities before I could even consider sharing classified intelligence, Morrison, said. Marcus nodded approvingly. A reasonable request. What would you like to see? Show me how you plan to infiltrate a heavily defended facility without backup or conventional support. Tonight, after the compound goes to minimal staffing, meet me at the north perimeter fence at 0200 hours. I'll demonstrate some techniques that aren't taught in conventional military training. As Marcus walked away, Morrison found himself facing a decision that could end his career if it went wrong. But the alternative, accepting defeat and abandoning their mission, felt like an even greater failure. For the first time since the disastrous rescue attempt, Morrison felt like there might be a path forward. He spent the rest of the day reviewing everything they knew about Kozlov's operations, trying to decide whether Marcus Kensington represented hope or just another way for everything to go catastrophically wrong. Morrison arrived at the north perimeter fence 5 minutes early, moving through the darkness with the practiced stealth that had kept him alive through countless operations. The compound's night lighting created pools of illumination separated by deep shadows, and he positioned himself in a spot that provided good observation while remaining hidden. At exactly 0200 hours, a figure emerged from the shadows near the fence line. Morrison had been watching that area for several minutes and would have sworn no one was there. Marcus appeared as if materializing from the darkness itself, wearing dark clothing that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the available light. Impressive approach, Morrison whispered as Marcus joined him. I've been watching that section for 10 minutes. Traditional concealment techniques passed down through generations of Royal Guards. We've learned that technology can be defeated, but properly applied fieldcraft remains effective across centuries. Marcus produced a small device that looked like a standard multi-tool but clearly served specialized purposes. Within seconds, he had created an opening in the security fence that was large enough for passage but virtually invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. The key is understanding that most security systems are designed to detect standard infiltration methods. Marcus explained as they moved through the compound. Guards expect to see movement patterns they recognize. Electronic surveillance looks for signatures it's programmed to identify, and physical barriers are built to stop conventional approaches. Morrison watched in fascination as Marcus navigated through the facility's security perimeter. Where a standard infiltration would involve careful timing to avoid guard patrols, Marcus seemed to move in harmony with the security rotations, always appearing to be in acceptable locations if observed from a distance. You're using their own security protocols against them, Morrison realized. Exactly. Every security system has rhythms and patterns. Instead of fighting those patterns, I integrate with them. A guard seeing someone moving through an area at the expected time, wearing appropriate clothing, and displaying confident body language will often assume that person belongs there. They approached the compound's main administration building, which housed sensitive communication equipment and would be heavily secured during normal circumstances. Marcus produced another specialized tool and examined the electronic lock securing the main entrance. Standard military approach would be to bypass the lock or find an alternate entry point, Marcus explained. But sometimes the most direct path is simply to make the security system believe you're authorized to be there. Within 30 seconds, the lock disengaged with a soft click. Morrison had expected to hear alarms, see flashing lights, or trigger some kind of security response. Instead, the building systems appeared to register their entry as a routine authorized access. How did you manage that without triggering alerts? The lock system maintains logs of all access attempts, but it's programmed to differentiate between authorized and unauthorized entries based on specific protocols. By understanding those protocols, it's possible to create an access signature that appears legitimate to the monitoring systems. Inside the building, Marcus led Morrison through a series of corridors that should have been protected by motion sensors and surveillance cameras. Yet they encountered no resistance and triggered no apparent alarms. Morrison began to understand that Marcus's approach to infiltration was fundamentally different from anything taught in conventional military training. The cameras are still recording us, Morrison observed. Of course, but they're recording two individuals moving through the facility at an authorized time, following standard patrol routes, and displaying behavior consistent with legitimate security personnel. The monitoring systems have no reason to flag our presence as suspicious. They reached a secure communications room that would normally require multiple authorization levels to access. Marcus approached the door's biometric scanner and placed a small device against the sensor. After a brief pause, the scanner accepted whatever authentication Marcus had provided. Biometric systems rely on comparing scanned data against stored authorization profiles, Marcus explained as they entered the room. With the right equipment and sufficient preparation time, it's possible to create temporary profiles that satisfy the system's requirements. Morrison was beginning to understand the full scope of what Marcus was proposing. This wasn't just about individual skill or courage. It was about employing completely different operational philosophies that most security systems weren't designed to counter. This is impressive, but Kozlov's facility will be operating under heightened security after our failed attempt. He'll be expecting infiltration efforts. Marcus nodded approvingly, which is exactly why conventional approaches would fail. Kozlov has prepared for assault teams, electronic warfare, and standard special operations techniques. He hasn't prepared for methods that predate modern security thinking by several centuries. They spent the next hour reviewing the facility layout and security protocols. Marcus demonstrated techniques for moving through defended areas that relied more on psychology and timing than on technology or firepower. Morrison found himself seeing familiar security challenges from completely new perspectives. The key principle is misdirection, Marcus explained. Rather than trying to remain undetected, I become part of the environment that security personnel expect to encounter. Guards are trained to watch for threats, not to question authorized activities that fit established patterns. As they prepared to leave the communications room, Morrison raised the question that had been troubling him throughout the demonstration. Even if you can infiltrate Kozlov's facility, Locating and extracting Dr. Vasquez will present different challenges. She's likely being held in the most secure section of the compound. That's where the Royal Guard's historical experience becomes most valuable. We've spent centuries developing techniques for extracting valuable assets from hostile environments. The specific technologies change, but the fundamental challenges remain consistent. They made their way back through the compound, and Morrison noted that their exit was as undetected as their entry had been. By the time they reached the perimeter fence, he was convinced that Marcus possessed capabilities that could succeed where conventional military operations had failed. "I've seen enough," Morrison said as they prepared to part ways. "What specific intelligence do you need from our previous operations?" "Guard rotation schedules, communication protocols, facility blueprints, and any information about Dr. Vasquez's likely location within the compound. Also, details about the security measures Kozlov has implemented since your attempted rescue." Morrison felt the weight of the decision he was about to make. Sharing classified intelligence with a foreign operative violated numerous regulations and could end his career if discovered. But the alternative was accepting defeat and allowing dangerous technology to fall into terrorist hands. "How long do you need to prepare for the mission?" 48 hours for final reconnaissance and equipment preparation. "I'll need access to certain specialized tools that aren't part of standard military inventory. And if this goes wrong," Marcus met his gaze directly, "then Dr. Vasquez remains captive. Her research gets sold to the highest bidder, and we continue living with the knowledge that we had an opportunity to prevent disaster but chose safety over action." Morrison understood that Marcus was offering him something his own superiors couldn't provide, and a chance to complete their mission despite official constraints. It was irregular, risky, and completely outside established protocols. It was also their only real option for success. "I'll have the intelligence package ready by tomorrow evening," Morrison decided, "but I want real-time communication during the mission. If this goes south, I need to know immediately so we can provide whatever support might be possible." "Agreed. And Commander, when this succeeds, Dr. Vasquez will be delivered to coordinates you specify. There will be no political complications or diplomatic difficulties, just a successful rescue that never officially happened." The intelligence transfer took place in a secured conference room that Morrison had reserved under the pretense of conducting routine operational reviews. Marcus arrived precisely on time, carrying a leather briefcase that looked more appropriate for a business meeting than a military operation. "Everything we've gathered on Kozlov's primary facility," Morrison said, sliding an encrypted tablet across the table. "Guard schedules, communication frequencies, facility blueprints, and our best assessment of Dr. Vasquez's probable location." Marcus reviewed the information methodically, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. Morrison was impressed by the depth of questions. Marcus clearly understood both the technical aspects of the security systems and the human elements that would determine the mission's success. "Your assessment of the Guard force is particularly valuable," Marcus noted. "Kozlov recruited experienced personnel, but they're trained for conventional threats. Their response protocols assume attackers will follow predictable patterns." "What concerns me most is the timeline," Morrison admitted. "Our intelligence suggests the auction is scheduled for tomorrow night. That gives you less than 24 hours to infiltrate, locate Dr. Vasquez, and extract her from a heavily defended facility." Marcus closed the tablet and leaned back in his chair. "Commander, rushed operations often succeed where carefully planned missions fail. Security personnel become complacent when they're not expecting immediate threats, and defensive systems are typically configured for sustained observation rather than rapid response." Morrison found himself both impressed and concerned by Marcus's confidence. "You're talking about infiltrating a facility that our entire SEAL team couldn't successfully penetrate. With respect, your team attempted a conventional military operation against a prepared enemy position. They fought the battle Kozlov wanted them to fight, using methods he understood and had countered. I'll be fighting a completely different kind of engagement." Marcus opened his briefcase and removed several items that Morrison didn't immediately recognize. They appeared to be a combination of traditional tools and sophisticated electronic devices, each showing signs of careful modification and customization. These represent 4 centuries of Royal Guard operational experience, adapted for contemporary challenges, Marcus explained. Traditional lockpicking tools modified with modern materials, communication devices that operate on frequencies most security systems don't monitor, and clothing designed to interact with both human psychology and electronic surveillance. Morrison examined one of the devices, a small, seemingly simple tool that had the weight and feel of precision engineering. How do you acquire equipment like this? The Royal Guard maintains certain institutional capabilities that don't appear in official military inventories. We've learned that some problems require solutions that can't be purchased through standard procurement channels. The conversation was interrupted by Morrison's communication device signaling an urgent message. He checked the display and felt his stomach tighten. We have a problem. Our latest intelligence intercept suggests Kozlov has moved the auction schedule forward. It's happening tonight, not tomorrow. Marcus absorbed this information without apparent concern. Actually, that works in our favor. Accelerated timelines create stress and confusion among security personnel. People make mistakes when they're rushed, and those mistakes create opportunities. But you'll have no time for final reconnaissance or preparation. Commander, the Royal Guard has always operated under the principle that preparation is mental rather than material. The right mindset and sufficient knowledge can overcome almost any tactical disadvantage. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. By providing intelligence and unofficial support, he was enabling an operation that could either save Dr. Vasquez or result in the death of a valuable ally. Either outcome would have serious consequences for his career and potentially for international relations. What do you need from us during the mission itself? Real-time intelligence updates if your monitoring systems detect changes in the facility's status. If Kozlov's people discover the infiltration before I can locate Dr. Vasquez, advance warning might make the difference between success and failure. Morrison nodded, then raised the question that had been troubling him since their first conversation. Marcus, why are you really doing this? I understand the personal motivation you mentioned, but this level of risk suggests something more than seeking justice for past victims. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Morrison sensed he was deciding how much truth to share. My family has served the crown for over 200 years. We've built our reputation on protecting people who can't protect themselves. Regardless of personal cost, Dr. Vasquez represents thousands of potential victims if her research falls into the wrong hands. And if you don't return from this mission, then I'll have died attempting something worthwhile, which is more than most people can say about their final moments. Morrison understood that kind of commitment. It was the same mentality that drove elite military personnel to accept impossible missions and somehow find ways to succeed, but it also made him realize the magnitude of what they were attempting. I want you to know that if this goes wrong, I'll do everything possible to provide support or extraction assistance. I appreciate that, but it won't be necessary. Royal Guard operations are designed to be self-contained. Either I succeed and Dr. Vasquez reaches safety, or I fail and become another training accident statistic. Marcus began packing his equipment with the systematic efficiency of someone who had prepared for dangerous missions many times before. Morrison watched the process and found himself hoping that confidence and skill would prove sufficient against overwhelming odds. How will you communicate Dr. Vasquez's location once you found her? I'll use a secure frequency that your monitoring systems can intercept. 3 short bursts will indicate successful location, followed by coordinates for the extraction point. If you don't receive that signal within 6 hours, assume the mission has failed. Morrison stood and extended his hand. Good luck, Marcus. I hope we see both of you tomorrow. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Commander, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Tonight, Dr. Vasquez's opportunity for rescue meets 4 centuries of Royal Guard preparation. As Marcus left the conference room, Morrison felt a complex mixture of hope and apprehension. They had exhausted all conventional options and were now depending on methods that existed outside standard military doctrine. Either Marcus Kensington would prove that traditional Royal Guard techniques could succeed where modern military operations had failed, or they would lose their last chance to save Dr. Vasquez and prevent her research from enabling future terrorist attacks. Morrison returned to the command center where his team was monitoring communication intercepts from Kozlov's facility. The next few hours would determine whether their unofficial partnership with the Royal Guard represented inspired thinking or catastrophic judgment. The facility's electronic signature showed normal activity levels, suggesting that Kozlov's people were preparing for the auction without any awareness that rescue efforts were already underway. Morrison found himself hoping that Marcus's confidence was justified and that centuries of Royal Guard experience would prove equal to contemporary security challenges. As the evening progressed, Morrison realized he had committed himself and his team to supporting an operation that officially didn't exist, conducted by methods they didn't fully understand, in pursuit of an outcome that could either vindicate their judgment or destroy their careers. Marcus approached Kozlov's facility as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting the valley into the kind of darkness that had concealed Royal Guard operations for centuries. He had spent the afternoon studying satellite imagery and reviewing guard rotation schedules, identifying patterns that would allow him to move through the compound without triggering defensive responses. The facility's perimeter lighting created distinct zones of visibility and shadow, but Marcus understood that artificial illumination often worked against security personnel as much as it helped them. Bright lights destroyed night vision adaptation and created blind spots that could be exploited by someone who understood the interplay between light and darkness. He began his approach from the eastern side of the compound, where prevailing winds carried sounds away from the guard positions and natural terrain features provided concealment during the final approach. His clothing had been selected not just for color but for texture and movement characteristics that would blend with the environment even under direct observation. The first challenge was the perimeter fence, which incorporated both physical barriers and electronic surveillance. Marcus had studied the system's specifications during his preparation and identified a section where underground cable routing created a brief gap in sensor coverage. By timing his penetration to coincide with a scheduled maintenance cycle, he was able to create an entry point without triggering alerts. Inside the compound, Marcus moved according to principles that predated electronic surveillance by centuries. Rather than avoiding detection entirely, he shaped his presence to match patterns that security personnel would expect to encounter. A figure moving confidently through authorized areas at appropriate times rarely attracted scrutiny, especially when that movement followed established patrol routes. The main facility consisted of 3 buildings connected by covered walkways. Marcus's intelligence indicated that Dr. Vasquez was most likely being held in the central structure, which housed Kozlov's private quarters and secure meeting rooms. This building would have the most sophisticated security measures and the highest concentration of guard personnel. As he approached the central building, Marcus encountered his first direct contact with facility security. A guard making routine rounds appeared around a corner, walking directly toward Marcus's position. Rather than hiding or attempting to avoid contact, Marcus continued his approach while adjusting his posture and movement to suggest authorized presence. "Evening," Marcus said in accented English that could have belonged to any of several Eastern European countries. "Kozlov wants the perimeter checks doubled before the auction begins." The guard nodded and continued his patrol without questioning Marcus's presence or authority. Marcus had learned that most security personnel were more concerned with following established procedures than with challenging individuals who appeared to belong in restricted areas. The central building's main entrance was protected by both electronic locks and human guards. Marcus observed the entry protocols from a concealed position, noting that authorized personnel used key cards followed by biometric verification. However, he also noticed that guards occasionally bypassed portions of the security process when escorting visitors or during shift changes. Marcus waited until a guard rotation created a brief window of reduced observation, then approached the entrance as if responding to an urgent summons. His body language and movement suggested someone dealing with an emergency that required immediate attention, and the remaining guard activated the door controls without requesting proper authorization. Inside the building, Marcus found himself in a reception area that led to several corridors branching toward different sections of the facility. His intelligence suggested that high-value prisoners would be held in the basement level, where reinforced construction and limited access points provided additional security. The stairway to the lower level was clearly marked and well lit, but Marcus noted security cameras positioned to monitor all movement in that direction. He studied the camera placement and timing, identifying a brief period when corridor maintenance lighting created shadows that would obscure facial recognition, while still allowing movement to appear routine. As he descended to the basement level, Marcus heard voices echoing from a nearby room. He recognized one of them as belonging to Viktor Kozlov, based on recordings included in Morrison's intelligence package. The conversation was in Russian, but Marcus's language training allowed him to understand references to auction timing and security arrangements. The basement corridor contained several doors, most leading to storage areas or utility rooms. However, one door at the far end of the hallway showed signs of recent reinforcement and was equipped with additional locking mechanisms. Marcus approached carefully, using a small electronic device to detect internal sound and movement. Through the door, he could hear someone moving around in what sounded like a small room. The movement pattern suggested a person pacing in a confined space, consistent with a prisoner being held against their will. Marcus examined the door's locking system and found it more sophisticated than the standard security measures used elsewhere in the facility. The locks required both electronic and mechanical keys, suggesting that Kozlov was taking Dr. Vasquez's detention seriously. Marcus produced specialized tools designed for exactly this type of challenge, working systematically through each layer of security while monitoring for any sound that might indicate approaching guards. After several minutes of careful work, the final lock disengaged with a soft click. Marcus opened the door slowly, prepared for any reaction from whoever was inside. What he found was a woman in her 40s, wearing clothes that showed signs of several days of confinement but otherwise appearing unharmed. "Dr. Vasquez," Marcus whispered. The woman looked up with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "Who are you?" "Are you with the Americans who tried to rescue me before?" "I'm here to get you out," Marcus replied, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "My name is Marcus, and I work with people who are very concerned about your safety." Dr. Vasquez studied his face carefully. "You're not American. British? Something like that. Right now, what matters is that we have a very limited window of opportunity to get you away from here. Kozlov is planning to conclude his auction tonight, which means increased security and reduced chances for successful extraction." "I overheard some of their conversations," Dr. Vasquez said. "They're expecting more buyers to arrive within the next few hours. The guards have been told to be especially alert for any rescue attempts." Marcus nodded, appreciating that Dr. Vasquez had been gathering intelligence during her captivity. "What can you tell me about guard rotations and internal security measures?" "They change shifts every 4 hours, and there's always someone monitoring the corridor outside this room. The guards check on me every 30 minutes, and the next check should be in about 15 minutes. Marcus considered their options. Conventional extraction would involve fighting their way through multiple security layers while protecting a civilian who had no combat training. That approach would almost certainly result in either capture or casualties, probably both. "Dr. Vasquez, I need you to trust me completely for the next hour. We're going to leave this facility using methods that will seem unusual, but I need you to follow my lead without question." "What kind of methods?" "The kind that have been keeping valuable people alive for the past 400 years. Are you ready to get out of here?" Dr. Vasquez looked at Marcus with the desperate hope of someone who had given up expecting rescue. "Yes, absolutely. Just tell me what you need me to do." Marcus began explaining the extraction plan, knowing that success would depend on Dr. Vasquez's ability to play a role that would be completely foreign to her scientific background. They had one chance to escape before Kozlov's auction brought additional security and eliminated any possibility of rescue. In the command center, Morrison watched his monitoring equipment for any signal from Marcus while trying to ignore the growing certainty that they were depending on a plan that existed far outside anything resembling standard military doctrine. Marcus quickly explained his extraction plan to Dr. Vasquez, emphasizing that their survival depended on her ability to convincingly play a role that would be completely outside her normal experience. "I need you to act like you're seriously ill and require immediate medical attention," Marcus told her. "When the guard comes for his next check, you'll be unconscious on the floor. I'll be posing as a medic who was called in to evaluate your condition." Dr. Vasquez looked uncertain. "What if they don't believe the deception?" "Then we fight our way out, which dramatically reduces our chances of success. The key is making them want to believe the story we're telling them. Guards are trained to handle escape attempts and security breaches, but they're not prepared to deal with medical emergencies involving valuable prisoners." Marcus produced a small device that looked like a standard medical scanner. "This will create readings that suggest you're experiencing cardiac irregularities. Combined with your acting and my medical knowledge, it should convince them that you need immediate treatment at a proper medical facility. They prepared the scene carefully, with Dr. Vasquez positioned on the floor and Marcus ready to assume his cover identity when the guard arrived. The timing had to be perfect. Too early and the deception might be discovered. Too late, and they would miss their window of opportunity. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor signaled the guard's routine check. Marcus activated his scanner and assumed the demeanor of a medical professional dealing with an emergency situation. When the door opened, the guard found what appeared to be a doctor examining an unconscious prisoner. "What's happening here?" the guard demanded in accented English. "She collapsed about 10 minutes ago," Marcus replied, projecting the confidence of someone accustomed to medical emergencies. "Kozlov sent me down to evaluate her condition. We can't afford to have her die before the auction concludes." The guard looked uncertain, clearly not prepared for this situation. "I wasn't told about any doctor being called." Marcus continued his examination while speaking with the tone of someone who didn't have time for bureaucratic complications. "Call Kozlov if you want, but her heart rate is extremely irregular and she needs immediate stabilization. If she dies in custody, there won't be any auction." The medical scanner produced readings that supported Marcus's assessment, and Dr. Vasquez maintained her unconscious act with impressive conviction. The guard found himself faced with a situation his training hadn't covered. Interfering with medical treatment could result in losing Kozlov's most valuable asset. "She needs to be moved to the medical facility immediately," Marcus continued. "Help me get her to the vehicle." The guard hesitated, but the combination of apparent medical emergency and the implied threat of Kozlov's displeasure convinced him to cooperate. Marcus and the guard carefully lifted Dr. Vasquez and began moving her toward the corridor, with Marcus maintaining his medical professional persona throughout the process. As they reached the main level, Marcus directed their movement toward a service entrance that would provide access to the compound's vehicle staging area. His knowledge of the facility layout, combined with the guard's assumption that a doctor would know where medical transport was located, allowed them to move through secured areas without triggering additional scrutiny. The service entrance led to a small parking area where several vehicles were stationed for operational use. Marcus identified a medical transport van that would serve their extraction needs while maintaining the deception that had gotten them this far. "Help me get her into the van," Marcus instructed the guard. "I need to get her to the medical facility before her condition deteriorates further." As they loaded Dr. Vasquez into the vehicle, Marcus positioned himself to address the guard's inevitable questions about procedures and authorization. The key was maintaining momentum. As long as they continued moving with apparent purpose and medical urgency, security personnel would be reluctant to interfere. "What about clearance to leave the compound?" the guard asked. Marcus checked his scanner again and projected increased urgency. "Her condition is critical. Call the gate and tell them to expedite medical transport clearance. Any delay could be fatal." The guard used his radio to contact the gate security, explaining that emergency medical transport required immediate clearance. Marcus listened to the conversation while monitoring Dr. Vasquez, ready to adapt their plan if complications arose. The gate guard authorized departure based on the medical emergency designation, and Marcus started the van while maintaining his professional demeanor. As they approached the compound's main exit, he prepared for what would be the most dangerous part of their extraction. The gate security consisted of 2 guards and an electronic barrier system designed to prevent unauthorized departures. Marcus approached with the confidence of someone conducting routine medical transport, but he knew that any detailed examination of his credentials or the patient would expose their deception. "Medical emergency transport," Marcus announced as they reached the checkpoint. "Patient requires immediate hospital treatment." The gate guard glanced into the van and saw what appeared to be an unconscious woman being attended by a medical professional. The combination of apparent medical urgency and the guard's radio confirmation of authorized departure created exactly the situation Marcus had planned for. "Clear for departure," the gate guard announced, activating the barrier system. As they drove away from Kozlov's compound, Marcus maintained their speed and direction until they were well beyond visual range of the facility. Only then did he signal Dr. Vasquez that it was safe to abandon her unconscious act. "That was incredible," Dr. Vasquez said, sitting up in the van. I can't believe we just walked out of there. The best deceptions work because they give people reasons to believe what they want to believe, Marcus explained. Security personnel are trained to prevent escapes, not to handle medical emergencies. We gave them a situation their training hadn't prepared them for. Marcus activated a secure communication device and transmitted the agreed-upon signal to Morrison's monitoring station. 3 short bursts followed by coordinates for the extraction point would let the Americans know that Dr. Vasquez was safe and where to collect her. "What happens now?" Dr. Vasquez asked. "Now you go home, your research remains secure, and Kozlov loses his most valuable auction item. Your government will handle the diplomatic aspects of this situation. But you're safe." 20 minutes later, they reached the predetermined extraction point where Morrison and a small team were waiting with appropriate transportation. As Dr. Vasquez was transferred to American custody, Morrison approached Marcus with obvious respect and appreciation. "I don't know how you did it, but you've accomplished something my entire team couldn't manage," Morrison said. Marcus smiled slightly. "Commander, sometimes the old ways prove most effective when modern approaches have failed. The Royal Guard has been handling impossible extractions for centuries. We've just learned to adapt traditional methods to contemporary challenges. Will there be diplomatic complications from this operation?" "What operation?" Marcus replied. "A Royal Guard operative died in a training accident at your facility. Dr. Vasquez was rescued by persons unknown using methods that have no connection to either American or British official operations. Sometimes the most successful missions are the ones that never officially happened." As the American team departed with Dr. Vasquez, Marcus reflected on the mission's success. Kozlov's auction would proceed without its most valuable item, potentially disrupting his entire network and reducing the flow of advanced weapons to terrorist organizations. Dr. Vasquez would return to her research under proper security, and her knowledge would remain in responsible hands. Most importantly, the Royal Guard had once again demonstrated that traditional principles of service, sacrifice, and innovative thinking could succeed where conventional military operations had failed. In an age of advanced technology and sophisticated security systems, the ancient commitment to protecting innocent people remained as relevant as ever. Morrison watched the Royal Guard operative disappear into the darkness with the same mysterious efficiency that had characterized his entire presence at the compound. For the SEALs, this mission would be recorded as a successful conclusion to their original objectives, achieved through unconventional cooperation with Allied forces. The next morning, intelligence reports would indicate that Viktor Kozlov's auction had proceeded without Dr. Vasquez's research, significantly reducing the event's value to potential buyers. Within a week, several key members of Kozlov's network would be arrested by various international law enforcement agencies, effectively dismantling an operation that had been selling advanced weapons to terrorist organizations for over 2 years. But none of those reports would mention a Royal Guard operative who had accomplished in one night what an entire SEAL team had been unable to achieve. Sometimes the most important victories were the ones that remained forever invisible to everyone, except those who understood that true service meant succeeding without recognition, protecting without praise, and accepting that the greatest accomplishments were often the ones that officially never happened.